Now every February is Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender History Month. This year it's been the transgender cases that have been hitting their headlines. Last week a High Court judge decided that the wife and children of a man who was now living as a woman should no longer have contact with their father in case they were excluded from their strictly Orthodox Jewish community. And another woman transitioning to be a man decided to have a baby before continuing with their sex change, but objected to being called a mother by the nurses. Others have faced problems when placed in male or female prisons midway through their transitioning process. And on Friday, Russell Brand declared that he wouldn't be forcing gender on his baby daughter, Mabel. Should we have the right to decide our own gender? And of course, the very verb is contentious, isn't it, Rachel? Because some people, it's not a decision for some people, it's absolutely what they are, and it's escaping from what they aren't. So, forgive me the imprecision of language, but there are many different cases and examples. What is life like for you now? Because last time you were on the programme, you were Richard.
I was. Life is very good in and of myself. It hasn't been an easy process for those around me, but at times. But for me, in myself, it's been an incredible moment of liberation after a long, long struggle. Yeah. I lived with what we call dysphoria, gender dysphoria, which is a kind of angst for most of my life. And I remember my earliest memory, age 4, was reaching into the airing cupboard at home and putting down my sister's undies and putting them on and getting a real visceral thrill from that and a sense of rightness. And I lived with that. And it was really, really hard. At school, I can remember a housemaster shouting across the rugby ground, "Hoskins, you're a fairy." And at the age of 15, I sent off for hormones to Amsterdam. Quite an unusual thing to do at that age. We're talking right at the beginning of sort of 1980s. Wow. And I sent off for hormones to Amsterdam. My father found the package when it came through the post, clearly worried that something should arrive from Amsterdam, went absolutely ballistic and burnt it down the bottom of the garden, and I bottled it and lived like that for the next 25 years or so.
So difficult for teenagers. I mean, it's better now, surely. There's more understanding. We'll speak to Susie soon about that. But so difficult for teenagers living in a situation, for whatever reason they may be in an Orthodox religious situation, yeah. Parents that just don't understand. For you, it was tough. So you understand the challenges yeah. now. There must have been key moments in your life, excuse me, like, because of anything gender segregated is hugely contentious, isn't it? Prisons yeah. and loos. What was the first time, do you remember, that you actually went to the ladies? Or what, hospitals yeah. is another issue.
Yeah, the first time I went to ladies was actually on my first appointment to the Gender Identity Clinic, which I'm now part of that system. And the first time I went to the loo, ladies in this country was on the way there. I mean, I think living with that dysphoria...
Was that kind of moment in your life?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was. And I've never had any problem going to ladies since. But I think that... living with that dysphoria is something that people need to recognise, that we talk about whether it's a choice or not, but I could not be anything else but that.
You say society's too genderised as well, you've said that.
Society is definitely too genderised. We fixate on binary thinking. But I mean, I would say to anybody who's watching the show that there is support in place. And what I did is what you should never do, which is I started self-medicating. I ordered drugs from abroad. I was taking things without any knowledge of my blood situation. Yeah. I had no blood tests. I nearly killed myself unintentionally twice. And I was going through hell. This is from just after I last appeared on the show.
But now, The Boy in the River was the book you were talking
That's
about.
Right.
Which is a fantastic book.
Thank you.
But now, of course, there are people who understand, and there is help. Yeah. Peter Saunders from the Christian Medical Fellowship. Hi, Peter. If an adolescent son or daughter of yours wanted to transition, what would you say to them?
Let me talk about this as a doctor.
Please just answer the question, because there's various things I want to get through now. If a teenage son or daughter of yours said that they wanted to transition, what would you say to them?
I would encourage them not to do so. Let me talk about this as a doctor.
What would you say as part of your discouragement? What arguments would you make?
Well, I would say it depended about what our understanding of this whole phenomenon was. And I became acutely aware of this a couple of years ago when one of our members, we have 5,000 members of CMF, she said, she contacted me, she said, I'm a GP in a university town. I get one gender-conflicted teenager seeing me every day. They're all asking for referral to the Tavistock and Portman Clinic in London, and they're all on antidepressants. What do I do?
Why do you believe that is happening?
Well, I think it's a new phenomenon. We've got to ask ourselves that. The Tavistock Clinic had 697 referrals in the year ending March 2015. It doubled to over 1,400 last year. That included 167 children aged 10 or less, and 3 children aged 3 or less.
Is it a new phenomenon, or is just
it's
no
a new
recognition of it?
phenomenon.
I mean, listen...
I think when we see...
Is this not, Peter, as a man of God, is this not a wonderful, God-given, glorious spectrum of gender? I mean, God is gender non-specific.
No, I think God's very clear that he created people in his own image and did it male and female.
Yeah, but
I think
that cannot mean parts of the body. I'm sorry. I remember a Baptist deacon saying to me years ago, you know, there's an awful lot of people that think God has a penis. That is clearly ridiculous, theologically ridiculous. I'm talking here about Christian theology. Whatever gender means in a theological sense, it cannot mean bits of the body. God is not about bits of the body. And that Adam and Eve part is about relationships.
Kathy's coming in. Have a think. Oh, a bit, Kathy. Yeah.
This is a war on reason and a war on science and a war on men and women. This is sort of extraordinary. Nobody has a problem with accommodating people who are transsexual. But what's happening with the current fashion and why these numbers have gone up that Peter refers to is this has become an ideology that's being imposed, an intolerant
like a fad.
ideology.
Is it a fad, do you think?
It's an ideology, a fashion, but an ideology is driving the fashion, and people are being naive in accepting it. Because if you were talking about creationism, everyone here would be outraged that you'd say evolution doesn't exist.
Believe you me, they wouldn't.
Sex is binary. Sex is binary.
No,
the term gender is a leftist term designed to confuse. Excuse me, it is.
Susie,
this is the truth. It's XX and YY apart from nothing% of the population. And there is this doesn't mean to say transsexuals don't exist.
Hang on a minute, Rachel. Susie Green, CEO Mermaids, charity supporting trans children and young people, mother of a trans girl. When you hear that it's an ideology and it's a fad and it's a fashion and gender is binary, what would you say to Kathy?
Sex is binary.
Sex is binary, sorry. What would you say to...
I am not the sum of my parts, and neither is anybody else. And the fact is that, you know, I represent hundreds of families and hundreds of young people who struggle with this daily. This is not a choice. This is not something that is chosen as fashionable. We know that those young people are incredibly at risk for suicide and self-harm. This is not something anybody would choose. It is incredibly difficult to come to terms with. Families struggle with this, often for years before they seek help for their children. And those children themselves often are absolutely refused any sort of acceptance by their own parents, and those are the young people that are at the highest risk. We know that parental acceptance and support means these young people function better. We know that we have fully functioning members of society who go forward to live happy lives. The thing that I really can't understand is, why is it anybody else's business?
What's your business, Peter? Happy lives. Peter, we're only here once. Not everyone believes, but
it's a lot more.
We're only here once. Let's enjoy it. Let's be who we are.
It's a lot more complex. It's a lot more complex than that.
Is it?
It is. Gender dysphoria is a real medical condition which causes great distress and needs to be handled very carefully.
Do you think it's a psychiatric condition?
No, but when we get to the situation where gay icons like Peter Tatchell and feminist icons like Germaine Greer are being labelled transphobic bigots and getting no platform at British universities and denied freedom of speech simply because they've expressed the view that trans women are not real women, then I think you've got to realise there's a massive new form of political correctness on the block and a huge cultural change taking place. And the medical profession's changed its view on this as well, I think, largely for ideological and political reasons, in order to appease the LGBT lobby.
Swept in a tide of political correctness. Sarah, why do some feminists have a problem with this, and what is their problem?
The big problem is that there's such a massive lack of clarity about what we're actually talking about when we talk about gender. So feminist analysis is that you have sex, which is male and female, and you have a class system of gender, which is men and women, and you're socialised through your life to either grow up to be a man with all the attributes that men are supposed to have, or to be a woman with all the attributes that women are supposed to have, and women are inferior and men have more power. And that's the feminist analysis. The problem with this idea that you're a woman because you feel like a woman inside, or a man because you feel like a man inside, is that essentially what that says is that men have power because they're innately supposed to have power, and women have less power because we're innately supposed to have less power. And that's really not a feminist, that is a very anti-feminist argument to be making. And that doesn't say anything about whether people should be protected from discrimination and violence. They absolutely should. It doesn't say anything about whether people should be allowed to, choose their names, live their lives, wear the clothes that they feel happy with, have surgery for dysphoria. All of those things are, absolutely acceptable and necessary for individual people. But what we can't give up is this understanding that gender in society operates as a class system, to women's disadvantage and men's advantage.
To your question, Nikki, is it a psychological condition? There was a very interesting study done about 4 months ago at the University of Oxford. It was covered by the BBC, about a young girl that was having dysphoria, thinking that she was at times a rabbit, a cat, and other things. And it was actually found to be an immunodeficiency, not a psychological disorder, but an immunodeficiency disorder, which was causing the brain chemistry to change.
We can't take individual cases and then use.
Well, no, this was a medical study. This was a medical study at the University of Oxford.
We have to be very, very
It was a completely credited medical study.
Susie,
this is not relevant. This is not relevant.
No, this was a medical study. This was not just one person.
wait a minute. So, audience, put your hands up. I'm going to come to you. See what you think, Susie.
A recent study by WPATH, which had nearly 28,000 trans people who fed into that study, showed that the levels of persecution, violence, harassment...
It's horrific.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
Using one single study of somebody who thinks they're a
this was
rabbit
the
or a
University
cat,
of Oxford. You may have heard of it.
I know,
It was a
but
well-credited
one
medical
person
study.
in comparison to nearly 28,000.
What do you think? Should we be able to decide or be who we are? What do you think? Gentleman there in the pinstripe jacket. Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
You referenced the family court judge who made the decision up in Manchester about the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. He took 5 days for that decision to not allow a trans father to have contact with his children. I would suggest that the children would enjoy much better outcomes if they had contact with a loving trans dad than growing up within a patriarchal, bigoted, closed-minded community.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else want to say yes?
Hello.
Hello.
I just wondered if anyone here really understood what it took to go through the medical process of looking at one, diagnosing a condition. It's probably far more thorough and rigorous than you imagine. And it may well be there are lots of young people who present themselves with problems and issues and so on. That does not mean that they will go on to treatment and transition.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, for people who don't understand, there's a vast... I know, Dan, you want to come in, and I will be with you. But, Susie, there's a vast array of, to many people, new terms here, isn't there? I mean, Facebook has, tens of different... I think it's something like 70 different...
I think it's 73.
73 different definitions. What is non-binary, for people who don't know? What is that?
Non-binary is somebody who doesn't identify themselves within the sex binary, as in male and female. You can have people who say, well, I'm not definitively a male or a female, and maybe I'm somewhere in the middle, or they may switch between the two. And I think the bottom line in all of this is...
Gender fluid?
Gender fluid, yeah. That sort of defines somebody who may move around. And I think the bottom line is people are people, and labels aren't necessarily very helpful. And whoever and however you live is surely up to you. And if you're not hurting anybody else, you're not breaking any laws, I don't understand what the big deal is about allowing somebody to be themselves.
Do you think, I'll go with you, Dan, do you think we are getting to a situation that we can see the road ahead and it leads to the end of the binary world? Do you back to toilets, for example, do you think the old ladies and gents has served its time?
Well, the actual facilities here are gender neutral.
In this particular
and
school,
everybody is going to the toilet normally, so I don't see what the big deal is.
But there's still a lot
What
of
about the BMA saying that the recommended thing would be not to call somebody an expectant mother but a pregnant person? Because there might be people thinking, oh, come on.
Yeah,
you know.
I think that would apply if you had somebody
dehumanising.
who was not natally
Well, the
female.
awful thing about saying you've got a choice between expectant mother or pregnant person is why can't you just be a pregnant woman? Why do you have to choose between femaleness and personhood? It's an outrageous dichotomy to put in place. We were talking earlier about the idea of desistance, about the fact that children sometimes present as trans and ultimately go on not to transition. We're not just talking about single cases. Multiple studies have found that there's an 80% desistance rate.
Can I just come in on that?
There is no way
those
to tell.
Those studies go back to the 60s and the 70s when the actual landscape for society was far different.
Peer-reviewed, multiple studies.
Daniel Hannan. I've got to be
But come on, mermaids.
Mermaids?
What?
In a second, Daniel.
Mermaids don't exist. What are we into? Has anyone got no scientific...
Do angels exist?
Angels don't exist. Mermaids certainly don't exist. Nobody is born with
angels
a
are gender non-specific, binary fluid. Daniel Hannan.
Susie said...
As a libertarian, you must think to yourself, you don't give a fig about this.
Right, and actually, which is why Susie was right to say twice, why is this a problem for anybody else? Very, very good question. Right? And therefore, there's a corollary of that. You don't need to involve the full force of state legislation in something that is a personal decision. So if you consider, for example, a situation where an employer has an employee who says, I'm transitioning, you know, I want to use this toilet rather than that one. I think we all know that that's a kind of situation that normal human relations will accommodate, right? They'd work out something that the rest of the workforce would be happy with. But as soon as you come in and say, by force of law, you are obliged to do X and Y, then from the point of view of the employer, it's no longer an employee to whom you owe a duty of care. It becomes an
antagonist.
Sorry, having gone through this, Daniel, I can tell you there's still a lot of prejudice. We still face huge battles. It is not easy. And it's very easy to say in the abstract that people might be moving on with this and society might be. But you try, as I have, and bring it home, and you know, you're dealing with maybe children or people close at home, and they battle with this because they want to be in a normal sort of setup and they want to be approved by their peers. There is still a huge amount of prejudice on this, and that's why we
something like saying that, you know, it's uncomfortable to say expectant mothers, we should say pregnant people. A lot of people who have sympathy with this think that that's just ridiculous, dancing on the head of a pin.
Well, it might be, but the point I want to make there is that why are we so fixated on whether, you know, we fill in questionnaires and they have to be either male or female? For goodness sake, in this day and age, why can we not allow people to express themselves how they feel is right? And it's not just about chromosomes. I'm sorry, and it's not just about bits of the body. There are also other factors like hormones, but also about the way you interpret yourself. And we need to have a society that accepts that. If you're trying to be happy, you're not an axe murderer. It's all that matters.
If you're trying to be happy, Lady in Red, yes, what would you like to say? You would say something in the first debate as well. Quick word here. Yes. We're getting to the end of this. What would you like to say?
Right. I went into the toilets in Asda in Fareham, and I spoke to a member of staff, and I spoke to a customer, just hello as I walked through. Put the shopping bags in the cubicle. When I came out, I couldn't get out. Male security guard blocking the doorway with a female security guard. And they basically accosted me and said, what are you doing in the ladies' toilet? I said, well, this is the way I'm dressed. I didn't want to go into the gents and scare anybody in there, so I'm in the ladies. And they said, you shouldn't be in the ladies. And they said, you're not a lady. And I said, how do you know? And the woman turned around to me and said, well, unless you've had the operation and can prove it to us, you shouldn't be in here. We can call the police. And I said, well, look, I shop in Asda a lot. It's my second home. I said, I've got bags and bags of shopping. I was breaking my neck. I needed to go to the loo. So would you please let me leave? So I left. The next time I went into Asda, I went up to the security guard and I said, hello, it's me again. I need the loo. Which loo do you think I should use today? He went bright red. And I said, maybe the disabled. He went, I think that would be best. And that was the situation.
Kathy, what were you saying now? I heard you muttering.
I'm just so worried that nobody's thinking about children. The problem is it's hard cases.
Would you have a problem if that... Sorry, what's your name?
Hard cases make bad law.
If Leslie was in the loo when you were in the... wait.
Yes, I think I probably would have a problem, I'll be quite honest. But hard cases make bad law. But I agree with Dan, we should be humane and compassionate and decent enough to accommodate individual pieces. You don't turn it into the law. If you turn it into the law, you are doing something terribly damaging and confusing and irresponsible to the way we bring children up generally.
The reason it's the...
doesn't do those things, what happens when someone is discriminating against them? Then the law surely should be there to help to
well,
stop
I'm
people
afraid
doing
we
that.
live in this age
Sarah,
of victim
last word,
politics.
very last word. We must move it on. But that's discrimination, isn't it? Or would you feel uncomfortable?
I mean, it's mortifying that you'd had such an embarrassing experience, but I don't think we should focus so much on toilets. Right. I think toilets are a very bad place to set this argument. We do need to talk about how, if we move towards self-identity as the only marker of sex, how that affects women in prisons, how that affects women in refuges. These are and how that affects women's sports as well, because women's sports is really not going to be able to carry on existing if male people can say that they are women and then compete against women.
This debate could carry on existing for hours. Fascinating. Thank you all very much indeed. We've got to leave it there. Thank you. You can join in all the debates. Log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions and follow the link. And then you can find the online discussion. And you can tweet using the hashtag BBCTBQ.